Welcome to the distance learning program on cloud computing by Innobus. In this chapter, we'll be covering the overview of private clouds. We have gone through the history of cloud and the different cloud service provider and how exactly the cloud works. And those are the public clouds. And in this chapter, let's go ahead and let's have an overview at the private clouds. First, let's see what are the private clouds. They are considered to be internal or corporate entities where the access to those clouds will be limited to a group of users or to a group of networks, and it's isolated from the public internet, and it limits the access using network address translations and using access control list. The traffic to and from these clouds will be limited to a particular number of users or to a particular group of network IDs that we mention in our firewall for our private cloud. And as it indicates, it's isolated from the public network. We implement different routing and NAT network address translations and access control list in the private cloud firewall settings. So whenever a traffic that's supposed to reach our resources which are running under our private cloud, this communication or the traffics will be monitored based on the access control list or the network address translation or the firewall rule. For example, the IP security rules that we write for filtering these communications will be checked for each and every transaction that we perform in the virtual private cloud resources. And these resources can be a MySQL server or a web server handling the web request on port 80 through HTTP, or any other web service which is running in the private cloud. And mostly the resources which are running under the private cloud are intended to be used by a particular group. In case of a business which is having a number of millions of customers across the globe, and the database of those customers will be kept in the private cloud. Since the database is sensitive, the private clouds are used to implement and to store the data of billions of customers, and the access to this database will be limited from a particular group of IPs or from a particular group of users. And these firewalls or these limits are created using the IP security or any other firewall techniques, and it results in improved performance. The difference between the performance of a private cloud from the public cloud is that the infrastructure is being shared in the public cloud, where, as we know, the cloud uses the virtualization techniques to run his or her application in the cloud infrastructure. And when it comes to public cloud, we run our web service or mobile application in our web servers, and the resources like CPU or memory or even the disk usage, all these resources are being shared among a public limited group. And when it comes to private cloud, these resources are allocated only for the resources or only for the usage for that is running inside our web application. It can be a database which is performing transactions of billions of users, or in other ways a banking application which has a number of transactions which is happening in a second. Millions of transactions might be happening. So when it comes to private cloud, the resources will be used only for these transactions performed inside our private cloud, and it always results in improved performance since the resources are not shared and only allocated to the web service or the process or which is running in the private cloud. So it's allocated only for the services which are there in our cloud, so automatically it results in improved performance. And the example for private cloud in public cloud is AWS Virtual Private Cloud. It runs the private cloud inside the public cloud and as an isolated cloud, and that's one of the best example for virtual private cloud in the cloud infrastructure. We can also create our own isolated cloud using the virtual private cloud of AWS. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of private cloud. The advantages are it results in improved performance. As we know, the resources that are allocated in our private cloud can be used only by the application which is running inside the private cloud. So the number of compute units or number of disks for storage or the RAM is being allocated only for our web service which is running in our cloud. So it is not being shared, so it automatically results in improved performance. And it also results in improved security, since the private cloud is running in our own data center and we have our own hardware and hypervisors in which we have created our private cloud, and we have full control over the hypervisor as well as the hardware, the underlying hardware, and the application or the instance which are running on top of these hypervisors. And the security can be implemented at all these three levels, at the host OS as well as at the hypervisor and at the operating system which is running on top of the hypervisor. We can implement three levels of security here, and we have improved control. So then when it comes to public cloud, we get access only to the virtual machine which is running on top of the hypervisor, and we can create our own security groups or we can create our own firewalls. But when it comes to private cloud, we get improved control. We can control the hardware as well as the software which is running in our private cloud, and we have control over the hardware. In case of any hardware failure or in case of any low performance, or if it results in a bad performance of in the private cloud due to any hardware failure, we can detect that hardware failure and we can replace the hardware failure without stopping or without affecting our production units that are running on top of our private cloud. So these are the advantages. Now let's see what are the disadvantages of private cloud. There are wastage of resources. Now we have a web application which is running in our private cloud, and these applications are being used in our business hours, say like from morning 8 o'clock to evening 5 o'clock. So after the 5 o'clock, the resources are, or the web service that is being used is less than 50% of what is being used on the business hours. So in that time, the resources which are allocated, we have memory, we have CPU utilization, and we have the disk utilization. All these resources are allocated to our web private cloud, and when the web service is not being used, the resources are being wasted. And we have another hurdle of administration. It's the disadvantages of private cloud is that we have to administer both the hardware and the connectivity of our private cloud to the internet, and also the hardware management, the configuration management, and also the patch management. Everything needs to be taken care of by the company who owns the private cloud, and it is a disadvantage when compared to private cloud that are available over the public cloud infrastructure. And it is also expensive. We need to set up infrastructure in case of the CPU and the RAM, and for the storage. For all these parameters, we need to set up hardware, we need to purchase the hardware, and we need to set up, and also we need to spend money on managing this infrastructure in the form of human resources for managing this infrastructure, and also for the infrastructure, the total infrastructure management, the building in which we are running the private cloud. Everything needs to be firewalled when it comes to private cloud, and the company who owns the private cloud needs to work out on all this category and need to spend money on setting up the firewall to the building, and from every point of view, from the purchase to the management and for the administration of the hardware that are available in the private cloud, which is an expensive from a business point of view. Now let's go ahead and check out what are the different private clouds that are available in the market. We have Eucalyptus, we have OpenNebula, and we have OpenStack. Let's go ahead and check what is Eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is a form of private cloud which can be installed on top of a CentOS based operating system or a Debian based Ubuntu operating system, and it works as the figure indicates. It works as two different clusters, the cluster A and the cluster B, and both the clusters have control over the web server as well as over the storage units, and both the clusters will be having different nodes on top of which we run our hypervisors, and on top of which we have our virtual machines running. And the Eucalyptus provides SOAP based access as well as REST based access for the developer to access the applications that are running on top of the Eucalyptus cloud. And another private cloud solution is OpenNebula. Same as like Eucalyptus, here we need two servers, and the server needs to be a 64-bit Ubuntu based operating system, that too with 1 TB of internal hard disk, and the partition should be, as we see here, it should be the root partition should have 40 GB and the swap partition should have 8 GB of data storage, and the metadata should have 1 GB, and the cloud one, the partition should be there as /srv/cloud1. That partition should have 40 GB, and we should also have a 850 GB of partition for data storage, and the infrastructure or the server 1 should support SAN enabled Ethernet cards, and we should have a similar server as a second server with the same spec of the first server. It should also support SAN storage and 1 TB of internal hard disk with the same hard disk specification as we have seen in the first server, and it's also working on top of a Xen hypervisor or on top of a KVM based hypervisors. Now let's see what is OpenStack. OpenStack is one of the mostly used private cloud technology in the current scenario. Whenever we implement in today's world, if we implement a private cloud, OpenStack is being used more than 60%, or is being preferred by more than 60% of companies who implement the private cloud. OpenStack Compute gives you a tool to orchestrate a cloud, including the running instance, managing the networks, controlling access to the cloud users, as well as projects that are running in the OpenStack cloud infrastructure. And the underlying project is Nova under the OpenStack, and as usual, the private cloud based on OpenStack works as a infrastructure as a service, and it supports both Xen and KVM based hypervisors for creating the OpenStack. And as the figure indicates, we can see the routers and the public switch with which our private cloud is being connected before the communication reaches from the public internet. So that's all about the private cloud. We have three different types: OpenNebula, OpenStack, and Eucalyptus. These are being used when we create a private cloud in a large scale infrastructure from a corporate point of view, and the advantages and disadvantages are as we have seen. So now that's all about the private cloud, and now let's go ahead and check what are the different cloud service providers available in the market.